So for 300 years, investors have basically believed that during times of conflict, the absolute safest place to hide your money is in government bonds.
Right, the ultimate safe haven.
Exactly. And for 300 years, those same investors have been quietly, just systematically robbed.
Yeah, it's wild.
It is. I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing the fundamental rules of your money, like your savings account, your government's budget, they have completely changed overnight. The reality you understood yesterday about how wealth works just vanished.
Poof, gone.
Right. And that is exactly what happens the moment a nation goes to war.
Yeah, but the financial ground literally moves beneath your feet, even if you are, thousands of miles away from any actual battlefield. It is this immediate seismic shift in how a country operates.
And tracing the tremors of that shift is our mission for this deep dive. We've got our hands on excerpts from this truly fascinating source, War Economy, Chapter 18, How Wars Explode Government Debt.
That's a great piece.
It really is. So we are going to extract the most critical insights from 300 years of wartime financial history. We want to look at how these geopolitical shockwaves alter the modern economy and, more importantly, the hidden mechanisms that are draining your own wallet right now. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to start, we really have to establish the core premise of the text, which is war is the most extensive activity a government can ever undertake. Period.
I mean, that makes sense.
Right, but the numbers are staggering. The historical data shows that during the first 4 years of a conflict, government spending leaps by an average of 7% of its GDP annually.
Wow, 7%.
Yeah. To put that in perspective for you, imagine 7% of an entire country's economic output, like every single good and service produced suddenly being swallowed up by the war effort. It is a massive, sudden drain on
It's a
resources.
sudden drain that demands immediate payment, right? Like, before we look at the historical wreckage, I really want to understand the mechanics here. How does a government actually pay that bill when it suddenly comes due? Because, I mean, if a government is like a household, suddenly going to war is like facing a catastrophic, life-threatening medical emergency or, your house catching on fire.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
You don't sit down at the kitchen table and carefully adjust your monthly budget for groceries.
Yep.
You don't worry about next year's vacation fund. You just pull out your wallet and swipe every single credit card you have to survive the night, assuming you'll figure out the math later.
Exactly. The panic and necessity in that comparison are spot on.
Yeah.
Because modern industrial warfare requires unimaginable scale. We're talking weapons, salaries, continuous manufacturing, just to replace destroyed equipment.
Yeah.
None of that can wait for a long-term budgeting committee to approve it. But unlike a household dealing with an emergency, the source material outlines that governments have 3 distinct levers they can pull to survive the night.
Right. Because most of us only have one lever, which is borrowing.
Right. We just have the credit cards.
Yeah.
But a government's first lever is taxation. So, raising taxes on income, sales, or wealth. But passing tax laws is, well, it's slow. And it's never enough to cover the sudden spike in costs.
So they have to move to the next option.
Exactly. They pull the second lever, which is issuing government bonds. That's borrowing money directly from the public or from financial institutions. And when even that falls short, they pull the third, highly controversial lever.
Oh.
Yeah, they have their central bank create new money out of thin air to buy the government's own debt.
Wait, inventing money to buy your own IOUs? I mean, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the combination of levers a government chooses dictates who actually ends up bearing the cost of the war.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So relying on taxes means the current taxpayers foot the bill immediately, right? Relying heavily on bonds means future taxpayers bear the burden when those debts finally mature. And relying on central bank money creation triggers inflation.
Which hits everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It acts as a hidden tax on everyone currently holding the currency. The purchasing power of your money simply melts away.
So it's current taxpayers, future taxpayers, or literally everyone with a dollar in their pocket.
Yep.
But if borrowing is the go-to panic move, how does a government actually convince people to lend them that much cash in the first place?
Well, Professor Gregory Clark's research gives us a perfect early example of this. During Britain's Second Hundred Years' War, between 1692 and 1815, they faced nearly continuous conflict. It basically culminated in the Napoleonic Wars.
Right.
By 1815, their accumulated national debt hit an enormous £600 million. Get this, Before 1799, war expenditures took up over 90% of all British government spending.
90%? Are you kidding me? How did they not just go completely bankrupt? Like, who is buying all those British bonds?
Foreign capital.
Really?
Yeah, wealth from France, the Netherlands, and Germany was fleeing the confiscatory appetites of the French army. Investors were looking for a safe harbor, and Britain offered one.
Wow. So people were literally running away from Napoleon and hiding their money in British government debt. It's fascinating to think that's the historical precursor to how U.S. Treasury bonds function as a global safe haven today.
It really is the same mechanism.
But relying on terrified foreigners is one thing. What happens when you have to convince your own citizens to foot the bill? Because the source gets into the United States entering World War I, and this is where the public relations machine really kicks in.
Oh, absolutely. The jump in scale was immense. Before entering the war in 1917, U.S. debt was a, manageable $2.9 billion. By 1920, it had exploded to $25 billion.
That is quite the leap.
Right. It jumped from about 3% of the national economic output to over 30% in just a few short years. And to fund this, the government relied heavily on Liberty Bond campaigns.
I was reading about those campaigns in the text, and it's honestly a masterstroke of psychological marketing. They use these massive patriotic appeals, bringing in celebrities, war heroes, community leaders to get everyday Americans to voluntarily lend them money.
Yeah, the peer pressure was real.
Oh, for sure. Imagine, pausing the latest Avengers movie in a theater today, and the lead actors look directly at the camera to tell you it's your patriotic duty to buy treasury bills. It's wild.
It sounds crazy now, yeah.
But the text points out this had a brilliant dual purpose. It wasn't just about raising cash.
No, it wasn't. It was also a vital tool for economic engineering. The Liberty Bonds soaked up the private purchasing power of regular citizens. By convincing people to buy bonds instead of buying consumer goods like clothes or cars, the government successfully suppressed private consumption.
Wait, I'm stuck on something. Why did the government care if people bought clothes or cars?
Because the manufacturing sector was already maxed out building military supplies.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if citizens were out spending money on consumer goods at the exact same time the government was buying military goods, the competition for limited resources would drive prices through the roof.
Making the war even more expensive.
Exactly. So by soaking up that extra cash with bonds, they reduced inflationary pressure.
Yeah.
It was highly orchestrated and kept the economy from overheating.
Okay, so if that, Taylor Swift-style celebrity playbook works so well, why couldn't they just run it again when World War II started? Why did the finances get so incredibly messy in the 1940s?
The simplest answer is scale. World War II produced the largest peacetime debt explosion in U.S. history.
Right.
According to the Congressional Research Service data we have, the debt skyrocketed from $43 billion in 1940 to $259 billion by 1945. It peaked at over 110% of GDP. The spending required was simply too massive for voluntary retail bond drives to cover.
The clean voluntary borrowing just wasn't enough anymore. And the text notes that World War II was unique because it was the only modern U.S. conflict where the government had to rely on direct money creation as a major intentional source of revenue.
Yes.
And this introduces a term that sounds like pure financial jargon, financial repression. What is the actual mechanism there? How does a government financially repress its own people?
Right. So it's through something called yield curve control. Because the government was issuing an unimaginable mountain of debt, they absolutely could not afford for interest rates to rise. If interest rates went up, the cost of paying back that debt would bankrupt them immediately.
Makes sense.
So they changed the rules of the game. The Federal Reserve stepped in, forcibly capped the interest rates on Treasury bonds at an artificially low level, and basically bought whatever bonds the public wouldn't buy.
So think of it like a casino where the house suddenly realizes it's losing way too much money.
I love this analogy.
Right. So instead of playing fair, they lock the doors, change the payout odds on the slot machines to guarantee you lose, and then force you to keep playing anyway.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. They held the interest rates they were paying to bondholders strictly below the rate of inflation in the broader economy.
Let me try to translate this for you guys listening. Think about it this way. Imagine you lend a friend $100 today. They promise to pay you back in a few years with a tiny bit of interest. You think, great, I made a smart, safe choice.
Right.
But when they finally hand you back your money, the cost of groceries and gas has skyrocketed. That cash can now only buy you $80 worth of the goods you could have bought when you originally made the loan.
Exactly.
Your friend legally paid you back the exact numbers on the paper, but they stealthily kept 20% of your actual purchasing power.
And that is financial repression. The government was paying back its debt with money that was becoming increasingly worthless. Through that mechanism, they were effectively transferring wealth from the bondholders directly to the state through what we call negative real returns.
Ouch.
Yeah, you might be gaining 3% in nominal interest, but if inflation is running at 6%, your real return is negative 3%. Your wealth is shrinking.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source material provides data from Yahoo Finance covering 300 years of conflicts, and the conclusion is just brutal. Wars are always, without exception, disaster times for holders of government bonds.
It is deeply counterintuitive for many investors. We're taught that government bonds are the ultimate safe asset, while things like corporate stocks and real estate are risky. But the research proves that during wartime, nominal government bonds repeatedly generate substantial real losses. They actually underperform those riskier assets.
And it's entirely because of the financial repression we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
The source states that the cumulative inflation rate averages about 20% in the first 4 years of a war. Your paper bond is locked in the casino with a capped payout, while inflation just eats you alive outside.
Precisely. Meanwhile, real assets like real estate, equities in companies producing essential goods or commodities, they tend to preserve their purchasing power much better. They have a degree of natural linkage to inflation.
How so?
Well, if the cost of building materials goes up, the value of an existing building generally goes up with it. Financial repression specifically prevents paper bond yields from doing the same thing.
So it's basically a 300-year economic law, hold paper government debt during a war, and your wealth gets quietly vaporized.
Pretty much.
But wait, if forcing bondholders to eat those losses worked so well in the 1940s, why did inflation suddenly explode out of control a couple of decades later? What broke during the Vietnam era?
Well, the political discipline broke. The dynamic during the Vietnam War was distinctly different from World War II. The Johnson administration made a fateful decision. They refused to choose between guns and butter.
Meaning they wanted to fund an escalating, wildly expensive war in Southeast Asia, but they also wanted to fund massive domestic social programs under the Great Society Initiative.
Exactly.
And the kicker, they wanted to do all of it without raising taxes.
Right. And that combination of immense military and social spending resulted in sustained massive deficit spending. The text points out that when investors and regular citizens see a government running massive deficits without raising taxes, they begin to expect inflation.
It's just human nature.
Yeah. And those expectations become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Workers demand higher wages to keep up. Businesses raise prices to cover the wages, and you get this vicious self-reinforcing spiral.
And that leads to the most dramatic moment in this entire timeline. When the debt burden from all that spending became too heavy, the government didn't just cap interest rates like in WWII, they completely abandoned their commitment to the gold standard.
A huge move.
I know 1971 is a famous turning point, but how does dropping the gold peg actually cause the economy to spiral?
Well, up until 1971, the U.S. dollar was backed by physical gold that served as an external discipline, like a hard ceiling. The government could only print as much money as it had gold in the vaults to back up.
Right.
When the Nixon administration abandoned that peg, they removed the ceiling. They could now print money far in excess of any physical reserves to pay for the Vietnam War and domestic programs. That unrestrained money creation directly fueled the massive stagflation of the 1970s.
And we should definitely take a second to define stagflation because it is the ultimate economic nightmare. It's when you have high inflation, so prices are skyrocketing, but your economy is stagnant, meaning unemployment is high and growth is basically dead. It's the worst of both worlds.
It really is. The purchasing power of the dollar plummeted, and it took a brutal decade of economic pain to stabilize the system.
So, let me get this straight. In World War I, they soak up our cash with celebrity bond drives. In World War II, they lock us in the casino and cap the interest rates. In Vietnam, they just delete the gold standard entirely.
Yep, that's the track record.
It seems like every time the government gets in over its head, they just rewrite the rules of the financial system. Are there any actual constraints left today to stop them from doing this?
Theoretically, yes. Modern democracies have institutions designed to constrain borrowing. In the United States, it's the debt ceiling, a statutory limit on borrowing that is supposed to force Congress to explicitly approve new debt.
But the text notes that the debt ceiling has been raised, suspended, or completely circumvented dozens of times.
It's an illusion of a constraint.
Totally. Which brings us to the present day. where the numbers have reached heights that are almost impossible for the human brain to comprehend. Let's look at the post-9/11 era.
The period from 2001 to 2022 represents the longest sustained military commitment in American history, and the fiscal cost has been unprecedented.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're looking strictly at the math here, based on economist Jeffrey Sachs's research from our source. This isn't about the politics or the morality of the post-9/11 era. We're impartially reporting the accounting and the economic mechanics laid out in the material.
Right. And the calculations Sachs provides are quite stark. He points out that if the U.S. government debt had remained at its year 2000 level, which was about 35% of GDP, the total debt today would be around $9 trillion.
Okay, 9 trillion.
But instead it reached $24 trillion by 2022 and currently exceeds $39 trillion.
39 trillion. And according to the data Sachs cites, the direct cost of the U.S. wars from 2001 to 2022 was a staggering $8 trillion.
Yes.
That is more than half of the extra $15 trillion in debt accumulated during that specific period, sitting right alongside the massive spending for the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic.
Sachs argues that strategic choices were made, prioritizing short-term geopolitical objectives over long-term fiscal sustainability. He actually describes this as an addiction to war and military spending.
This raises an important question, though. If taxes weren't raised to pay for that $8 trillion, who is actually paying for it?
We are back to the three levers. Politicians rarely want to raise taxes today, and they don't want to cut services today because both are politically unpopular.
Naturally.
So they pull the borrowing lever. This shifts the massive burden onto future generations in the form of higher future taxes, reduced public services, or that insidious inflation we discussed. You're essentially passing the bill to citizens who didn't have a vote, or in some cases, weren't even born when the spending decisions were made.
It is an incredible intergenerational wealth transfer via government debt. But looking at that $39 trillion figure, I mean, if a normal household had that kind of debt-to-income ratio, the bank would foreclose on them immediately.
In a heartbeat.
Why hasn't the U.S. economy just collapsed under the weight of it? Like, how does this compare to what other nations did when they hit their breaking points?
Well, our sources highlight a really stark contrast between the UK and Germany after the World Wars. After World War II, the United Kingdom had a debt burden well over 200% of its economic output.
100%.
Yeah, but they didn't collapse. They managed to slowly grow their way out of it over several decades. They maintained strict budget surpluses, experienced strong post-war economic growth, and received vital assistance from the American Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild their industrial base.
Right. And then you have Germany after World War I. They had heavy wartime debt, plus the crushing demands of reparations. They tried to pull the third lever. They tried to just invent their way out of the debt through massive money creation.
And we know how that ended. The massive influx of new money chased a broken supply of goods, leading directly to the tragic hyperinflation of 1923. The currency became so worthless that people were literally using wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. It wiped out the German middle class and set the stage for immense political instability.
So why is the U.S. immune to the wheelbarrow scenario right now with $39 trillion in debt?
The U.S. situation today relies on an incredible privilege, which is the dollar's status as the global reserve currency. Foreign governments, central banks, and global investors essentially have to hold U.S. Treasury bonds to participate in international trade or buy commodities like oil.
I see.
It creates a captive global audience that constantly demands U.S. debt.
So that global demand acts like a massive shock absorber, allowing the U.S. to borrow at artificially lower interest rates because everyone needs dollars. But other countries aren't stupid. They see the inflation.
Exactly, and that privilege is not unlimited. The source material highlights immense current pressures. With surging oil prices, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and defense spending spiking across Europe and Japan, the global bond market is getting incredibly nervous.
Yeah, I've seen that in the news.
Right. I mean, recently, the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield soared by over 40 basis points in a very short time, which, in the bond world, is a massive earthquake. Markets are pricing in higher inflation and the sheer flood of new bonds the U.S. has to issue.
And the text mentions that the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively working to de-dollarize their trade. They want to bypass the dollar entirely.
That's a huge threat.
If they succeed and global demand for U.S. debt falls, who is going to buy all these bonds? If interest rates keep rising, the sheer cost of just paying the interest on $39 trillion will absolutely crush the federal budget.
It is a compounding problem. When the interest rate rises on trillions of dollars of debt that must be refinanced every single year, the annual deficit widens further. That requires even more borrowing just to pay the interest, which pushes the rates higher still. It is one of the most consequential open questions in international finance today.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from 17th century Britain fleeing Napoleon through the celebrity Liberty bonds of WWI, the locked casino of financial repression WWII, the stagflation of the Vietnam era, right up to a modern $39 trillion reality. The ultimate takeaway from 300 years of data is that the true cost of a conflict extends far, far past the battlefield.
It really does.
The bill doesn't magically disappear just because the shooting stops. It is paid for by a hidden, silent tax on your savings, executed through inflation and financial repression.
And understanding these historical patterns isn't just academic trivia. Recognizing the mechanisms, like knowing why real, tangible assets have historically protected wealth better than paper bonds during conflicts, is essential for protecting your own financial future.
Absolutely.
In a world that seems increasingly conflict-prone, understanding how governments fund their survival is a cornerstone of informed citizenship.
It really is. The rules of money change the moment the cannons fire, and you need to know how the game is rigged before you sit down at the table. Which brings me to one final lingering question to leave you with something to mull over that builds on everything we've just explored.
I'm intrigued.
So our sources show a 300-year economic law, the massive industrial manufacturing demands of warfare, building tanks, planes, and bullets. They cause these catastrophic debt explosions. But what happens to that historical rule if the major civilization-defining wars of the future are fought entirely in cyberspace?
Oh, wow.
Right. If a global war is fought with malicious code and server farms rather than artillery shells and steel mills, does the government debt still explode in the same way? Or does the wealth of the nation just quietly transfer from the public directly into the hands of a few massive tech monopolies providing the digital armor? It's a completely new frontier of the war economy.
That is a terrifying thought.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the financial world around you, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.